So in this video, I'm going to be demonstrating this soon to be released 80 gigabits per second Thunderbolt 5 compatible SSD enclosure by ACASIS. Now this model is the TB501 Pro, although we already currently have a TB501 Pro, but this particular variation of the TB501 Pro has actually got something very unique about it. It is going to be ACASIS's first enclosure which is compatible with PCIe Gen 5 SSDs, and in fact it is one of the first enclosures in the world which is compatible with PCIe Gen 5 SSDs, and I believe that this video may even be the first video on YouTube with any enclosure which is compatible with PCIe Gen 5 SSDs. So what I'm going to do in this video is to show you how to put it together, how to format it. I will run some Blackmagic disk speed tests. I will then do some real-world disk speed tests, and then I will do some real-world disk speed test results, and then I will do an end summary. Now there will be chapters to all of those things in the video, so just feel free to skip through to whatever bit like takes your fancy, as it were. However, just before I get into all that, I just need to explain some really important stuff before I get into the video. So as already mentioned then, this particular enclosure is compatible with PCIe Gen 5 SSDs. So what I'm going to be pairing up this enclosure with is the Samsung 9100 Pro, and this is the 4TB variation. So that is the actual combination that I will be testing in this video. Now, to do the testing, what I would normally do is to use my M4 Max MacBook Pro here with its 1TB internal storage to do the testing for any type of like external SSD. However, during my testing, it became apparent that this particular combination of enclosure and SSD is actually faster than the Mac's internal storage. So in that instance, the Mac would have become a bottleneck if I'd used it as the source drive within the tests. So what I decided to do was to have my ACASIS RAID 0 drive set as the actual drive to test the data from, because that of course is going to be a lot faster, and indeed that particular drive setup is around 11,000 megabytes per second. However, what I quickly ran into were issues with the MacBook Pro's ability to power 3 different Thunderbolt 5 SSDs. So just in a nutshell here, because I will talk about this as I run through the tests, all 3 SSDs were connected to the MacBook on individual ports, because the MacBook's got 3 individual Thunderbolt 5 ports. However, anytime I connected the third SSD, it would not be seen. Now, this problem with the third SSD not being seen was regardless of which ports were used, or which combination of SSD to which ports were used, or which order they were connected. So regardless of whatever way I done this, the third SSD was always not seen. Now, because the MacBook wouldn't work with the 3 SSDs all plugged in at the same time, and by the way, that is down to a power issue with the MacBook, and I'm going to do a video about that one very soon. What I had to do was to power one of the SSDs externally, and for that I used the iVANKY Fusion Dock Pro 3 Thunderbolt 5 docking system. So if it wasn't for this docking system, I could not have done this video, because basically what it was, one of the SSDs run through this, and that was one of the SSDs that were in the pair with the RAID 0. So this was basically powering one of the RAID 0 SSDs before it was passed through to the MacBook. So then that way the MacBook would then see the RAID, and then once I connected the new TB501 with the Samsung SSD, it then also seen that as well. Now I know that all sounds a little bit boring, however it is something that I did have to explain just so that people could understand exactly what the test scenario was here. So to be perfectly perfectly clear, the new TB501 Pro with the Samsung Gen 5 SSD in it is going to be fed its data from a RAID 0, which, as you will see during the actual speed testing, is way faster than the actual TB501 Pro new version with the Samsung Gen 5 SSD in it. So basically there are no bottlenecks, and what I'm going to show you here is the fastest I was going to say Thunderbolt 5. Technically speaking, it's at 80 gigabits per second enclosure, although it is Thunderbolt 5 compatible. I am going to be showing you the fastest Thunderbolt 5 SSD setup that I've managed to put together so far. Anyway, that's all done there, and just the last thing to say is, of course, ACASIS did send me the enclosure in exchange for a review, and no money has changed hands, so let me get into all this. So before I get into showing you how to put together the drive, I'm just going to quickly show you what comes in the boxes for both the SSD and the enclosure. So what I've got on the table here is everything that comes in the box for the enclosure. So there's the box itself there, which everything fits into nice and neatly. Then there is a user manual. We've got two thermal pads here. One is 1mm in thickness, the other one is 0.5 mm in thickness, and I will be using both of the thermal pads. Here we've got a little rubber stopper or standoff, and what this is used for is to secure the SSD within inside the enclosure, and it helps to stand it off the main board inside the enclosure. Here we've got an 80 gigabits per second cable. Now this is 50 centimeters long, which is about 20 inches. And then finally there is the new TB501 Pro. And then as far as the SSD is concerned, there's the box that it comes in. Now the interior packaging here, which holds the SSD in transit, also has this envelope in the bottom of it here, which I'm assuming has got the warranty details in it. All it is, you have to rip this open to get it out. I'm not going to do that. However, you should probably open that up just to check out the warranty if you buy one. And then there is the SSD itself. Now, just taking a quick look around the enclosure itself, and it's worth noting that the entire enclosure is made of an alloy. So the enclosure itself acts as part of the heatsink system. Now this is the top of the enclosure, and here where we can see this hole, that's the air intake with the fan behind it. Now on this side here, that is part of the ventilation system or the exhaust port for the air movement, and then on this side that's another exhaust port there as well. Now if we have a look at this edge here, it says open, so if we just turn upside down as it were, and then if we just get our thumb up the side here and just press up, it will just lift the bottom of the enclosure off, and then that's how we gain access to it to put the SSD inside. And I will do that in a moment. Now if we have a look on this edge here, we've got a port here which is an 80 gigabits per second C port, which is where we connect our 80 gigabits per second cable to, and this is also going to be compatible with standard Thunderbolt 5 cables as well. Now next to it there, that's actually an indicator which will light up when the drive is in use, and then next to it there, that is a button for the fan. So to be clear, when you first connect the enclosure, it doesn't have the fan on it, and what happens then is that the fan will only come on automatically when it's needed. So it's got a temperature sensor inside sensing the temperature of the SSD, and then the fan stays off and only switches on when necessary. However, if you want to, if you just do a long press on the button for a couple of seconds, then that will permanently put the fan on, and I will actually give you an example shortly of what the fan noise is like as well. And this is the rubber standoff that we use for holding the SSD into the enclosure. Now hopefully I'm getting focus here, and we should be able to see that the standoff has a groove all the way around it. Well, basically what happens is that groove slides over this half cutout on the SSD like that and holds it into place. So like I say, a groove around the end of the actual standoff just slots into the cutout on the SSD, and then we press that down into a hole inside of the enclosure to lock it into place. Now I'm only showing you this like this now only because it may not be super clear when I actually put it inside of the enclosure. Now I'm just going to quickly show you one of the thermal pads here because it'll be easier to show you it like this, because you may not understand exactly what I'm doing with it when I attach it to the SSD. So each thermal pad has like protective layers of cellophane, one on each side. And so what we do, we just grab these tabs on the sides here and then pull the tab, and then that will peel off the cellophane layer, and we just do that for both sides of each of the thermal pads. Now the next thing to do is to insert the SSD, and this is super straightforward. Now as you can see here, this is the orientation that the SSD should be in. Now don't worry about this, you cannot put the SSD in the wrong way round, and the reason why is, if we have a look on the pins here for the SSD, there's a cutout just here. Well, that cutout lines up with this guide pin on the M.2 slot inside of the enclosure. So what we need to do is to just guide in the SSD into the M.2 slot and then give it a bit of a push. Now once it is firmly connected, what we're going to notice is that it'll hold itself into place, and it kind of goes springy like this. See that? So that's when we know it is connected in properly. Now what I'm going to do now is to attach the little rubber standoff to the end of the SSD here. Now the reason why I've done the close-up before is just in case you don't see exactly what's going on there, but basically the groove of the little rubber stopper fits inside of the half cutout on the SSD there. Then push it down, and then that rubber stopper will connect into a hole on the board with inside there. And then the next thing to do is to apply the thermal pads. Now what I'm going to do is to attach them on the inside of the lid here, and the reason why is because the lid has already got this cutout area here which lines up with the thermal pads. So I'm going to attach the thermal pads there, and then when the lid closes over, it is then going to connect the thermal pads directly over the top of the SSD. So I'm going to start off with the 1mm or the thicker pad first. Now you'll have to bear with me here because I might have to take my time a little bit just so that I don't mess things up here. Hold on, actually let me just start on the other side first. Okay, so that's that side done. Now as far as this side is concerned, I'm not too sure if, oh there we go, I've managed to catch the end there. What it is, they are a little bit fiddly, but kind of just take your time and bear with it. It's obviously, I'm making this look like harder than what it is because I'm trying to talk and whatever at the same time as well. Now what I'm going to do here is to just line this up inside of that cutout piece in there, and hopefully right there, let me just, oh right there, yeah, I can push it in on the side there. Okay, right, what it is, I'm just going to have to explain here that I'm actually not looking at this properly. I'm looking at a small monitor, so you know, when you do this, it's definitely going to be way easier than what it looks like I'm doing here, because I'm making this look like it's difficult when it's not. So I'm now going to do the same thing with the other thermal pad here. Oh, the other thing to do as well, obviously, is to make sure you've got your hands clean and stuff before you start doing these types of things. So let me just get this one off here. Oh, I'm having difficulty here. What it is, I just want to do all of this in one go, just so that you've got a really good idea of kind of like, you know, how long it takes and what you should be doing. However, this one, oh, I've caught it now. This one was just a little bit more trickier, and this is the 0.5mm one. So what I'm going to do here is just line that up over the other one. Again, you know, when you do this, you're not going to be trying to film something while you're doing it at the same time, so it will be a lot easier. Now that one doesn't look like it's gone on straight at the end. Now don't worry about that there, because the actual two of them are connecting together there, and the top one actually is sitting on top of the plate area there, so that's fine. And then the last thing to do is to just put the bottom plate back onto the bottom of the enclosure, and this is super straightforward. If we have a look here on the bottom plate, we've got like this little lip bit here. Well, that guides itself into this slot here at the end on the inside. So let me just show you that. So just slot that in there, push it down, and then There we go, it is all in place. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is to give you an idea of what the fan noise is like on the enclosure. And right now the fan is off because the enclosure is in automatic mode. Now if we have a quick look here, we should be able to see a little green light on. So that's just telling us that it is actually connected to the Mac. So what I'm going to do now is just hold in the fan button here just for a couple of seconds. Okay. So right now the fan is on. Now of course this mic is just above me here in a boom position, but it is pointing straight down now at the enclosure. Anyway, what I'm going to do now is just to go quiet for a few seconds and let's have a listen to see if we can hear the fan noise. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is to disconnect my microphone from the boom. It will go a little bit kind of rumbly and stuff because I've got to disconnect it off the boom. Then I'm just going to slowly bring the microphone down towards the enclosure and then just do like a really close position just so you can hear exactly what the fan sounds like. Okay, so what it is now, I'm just actually holding the microphone here, so I might be creating some noises on the mic itself. Anyway, what we've heard there is that, like, you know, whatever the noise was like when the microphone was placed above my head, and that means that the actual enclosure is only about 1.5 foot, 2 foot away, something like that. And then what I've done is to bring the microphone down clearly right by the enclosure to give you an idea of what that sounds like. However, what I would say is that this enclosure is quieter than any of the other ACASIS enclosures as far as I can tell. Anyway, with all that said, let me now start getting into all of the testing and stuff, but first I will show you how to format the SSD. Okay, so I'm onto the desktop for my MacBook, and as we can see here, there is the SSD. And the reason why we can see it is because I've obviously been using it to test it before doing this video. Now, if you build the exact same SSD, or indeed if you do any type of enclosure with a fresh brand new SSD with inside of it, what will happen is that when you connect it first time to the Mac, it's going to pop up with a message asking you to initialize the drive. So you just go ahead and follow the prompt to initialize it, and then from there you can also format it. However, what I'm going to do here is just go through the process of formatting anyway. So if you know where disk utility is, you go ahead and go to disk utility. However, if you don't know where it is, no worries. If we come up here to the top where we see this magnifying glass, I'm just going to tap on here, and this is going to open up Spotlight Search. So there we go, Spotlight Search. Now inside here, just start typing disk utility. So DISK, and at some point it will actually prompt you for disk utility. So I'm just going to tap into disk utility. Now within disk utility here, what I'm going to do first of all is to make sure where it says view here, tap into here and make sure that it says show all devices. Now the reason why I always suggest this is because you do get more options when you are formatting any type of drive. So show all devices. Now as we can see here, it says Samsung SSD 9100 Pro 4TB media. So that's obviously the drive that I'm using. And another good hint here is that you should not have any other external drives connected, whether that be SD cards or SSDs or hard drives. Don't have anything else connected at this point, just so that you don't accidentally erase any other external media. So what I'm going to do is to tap into the root here. Now if it's your first time with a fresh disk, you'll only actually get the root option anyway. However, if you're going to be formatting something that had already been formatted, you might see things like containers and partition information, but just make sure to tap onto the root of the drive there. And then what I'm going to do is come over to erase. So I'm going to tap on erase. Now in here, I'm going to give it a name. So I'm going to give it the exact same name as what it already had, which is ACASIS TB501 Samsung 4TB. And then for format, I'm going to make sure that it is on APFS, and for scheme, I'm going to make sure that it is on GUID partition map. Now, selecting these two options here is going to give us our fastest SSD or fastest drive structure when we are on Mac OS. Now, at this point, I would usually start explaining things about different formats if you were going to use this external SSD with other platforms. However, this is very specific to Mac, so I'm just going to stick to the one thing here, which is APFS GUID partition map. So I'm going to tap on erase here. Now that's going to unmount the drive, it's going to format it and then remount it. Now with a fresh disk, it is going to be super quick like this was. However, if you're reformatting any kind of disk which has already got data on, that will probably take a fair bit longer to format, depending upon how much data was already on that SSD or hard drive or whatever media that it is that you are formatting. Anyway, I'm just going to tap on done here, and as we can see, there's the SSD again back on the desktop. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to power down my Mac, and then I'm going to connect my RAID system to it and then reboot it, and then start going into some synthetics using the Blackmagic disk speed test. Okay, so just before I get into the Blackmagic disk speed test, I'm going to explain something about the RAID here. So as we can see, there's the RAID. Now this is built up from an original ACASIS TB501 with a 4TB Western Digital SN850X inside of it, and then the second drive that is used as the pair is the previous ACASIS TB501 Pro, and that also has a 4TB Western Digital SN850X inside of it. Now, as I'd already mentioned from the outset, unfortunately I have run into problems now with the MacBooks, as in they cannot power 3 individual Thunderbolt 5 SSDs using their 3 individual ports. There's actually a bit of a problem with power delivery with the MacBooks. So what I've had to do here is to introduce a Thunderbolt 5 docking system to connect one of the drives off the RAID to. Now what this means is that it will run slightly slower than usual, and the reason why is because the Thunderbolt 5 dock actually reduces the speed slightly of any Thunderbolt 5 SSDs attached to it. However, as we're going to see shortly, the speed of it is still faster than this 4TB that we're testing, and also faster than the Mac's internal storage, which obviously means that this RAID is the better option for testing the speed for this 4TB that I've just put together. Okay, so what I'm going to do first of all is just connect to the internal storage. So I'm going to test for 5GB here. So I'm going to select target drive. Now I'm on my home folder, so this is the internal storage. So I'm just going to let this run through. Now, as we're going to see with the write speed, that might be a little bit wobbly. It's under 5,000 at the moment. Now it's gone up to 6,400. Now that might actually drop down again at some point. And then as far as the read speed is concerned, that might be consistently over 5,000 for the best part. Now the problem here though is that these speeds are far too close to this new external 4TB. So what would happen here if I started to use the internal storage as part of the actual real world disk speed testing is that it could end up becoming a bottleneck for this external 4TB that we've just put together, and that definitely wouldn't help us to assess the maximum fastest speed for this external 4TB. Okay, so we've seen what these numbers are like here. So now what I'm going to do is go to this new ACASIS external with the Samsung 4TB in it, and I'm just going to run the test a few times here. And as we're going to see, this is probably going to be quite consistently around the same speeds every time. And in fact, the write speed is probably maybe a little bit faster than what the Mac's internal is. And then the read speed also is probably going to vary a little bit slightly, just under the 6,000 megabytes per second mark. But as we can see here, these speeds are very close to the max internal storage, and indeed this 4 terabyte will actually be slightly faster in certain instances. So like I say, if I were to use the internal storage, it could possibly bottleneck and skew the testing. However, if I switch over onto the RAID, as we will see here, now don't forget this RAID is slightly limited because one of the drives out of the RAID is going through a Thunderbolt 5 docking system. However, what we're going to see here is this is definitely faster than both of them. So as you can see there, 8,500 megabytes per second and 9,700 megabytes per second. So these are going to be fairly consistently, in fact that's just gone over 10,000 megabytes per second for the read. So like I say, this is going to be quite consistent with these speeds, which definitely means that we've got faster speeds than what this 4 terabyte is, which is the reason why using the RAID is definitely going to be better to assess the speed of this new 4 terabyte external. And don't forget, if these two SSDs that I'm using for this RAID were both directly connected to the Mac, we would definitely be seeing even faster speeds than this. Anyway, what I'm going to do now is just prepare for the real world disk speed test. Okay, so just before I get into the real world disk speed testing, I'm just going to explain a few things first. So this drive that's open here on the bottom, this is the 8 terabyte RAID 0. And then the drive at the top here, this is the new ACASIS TB501 with the Samsung 4 terabyte Gen 5 SSD with inside of it. Now I've also got Activity Monitor open here, and this is going to allow us just to keep an eye on the bit rate in real time as it's going through. Then I've also got the stopwatch here because I'm going to time how long it takes to move the folder, but like backwards and forwards between the two drive systems. Now as far as the folder is concerned, let me just show you the information for the folder. So this folder is 1 terabyte in size, or to be more precise, it is 1,000,000 megabytes, and it also consists of 15 items. Now the 15 items in here are all basically ProRes 422HQ files. Now there's 2 reasons for that. First reason is because these are typically the types of files that I would personally use on external media in order to do video editing, and also because these are singular big files, these are going to give us the best opportunity for testing for speed. And the reason why is because it's a lot easier to write continuous large amounts of data, and of course the whole point here is for us to get an idea of just how fast this drive is. Okay, so what I'm going to do is to move the folder to the 4 terabyte, in which case we are going to be measuring or timing the write speed for the drive. So let me just start this and I'll explain what's going on. So drop, start. Okay, so what I'm doing here is testing for the write speed of the 4 terabyte. So what I'm going to do is make a calculation at the end of this based on the timing. So what I'm going to do now is to just speed through this until I get to the end so I can get this timing. Actually, just before I do start speeding this up, just check out the data written speed here in Activity Monitor. That is around 6.6 gigabytes per second, and that is going to be probably quite consistent with that all the way through this particular data dump. So that's very interesting because that's going to give us like an initial indication as to what this speed really is. Anyway, I'm just going to speed up through here until I get to the end and then get a reading off the stopwatch. Okay, I'm just going to come back in here and get ready to hit pause once that data is moved over. Give us a second and there we go, pause. Okay, so that was 2 minutes and 32 seconds. Now what it was, as you could see there, the actual kind of like Mac OS indicator actually cleared sooner. However, I've took the reading once that folder was populated there. Anyway, let me just make a note of that timing, which was 2 minutes and 32 seconds. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is to test the read speed for this new 4 terabyte SSD. Now the first thing that I'm going to do is to delete that folder from the RAID, and then I'm going to empty the bin. However, it may not actually be necessary for me to do that. I could have just retitled that, and the reason why is because this particular RAID has got like a really big cache on it, so we probably still would have hit it at full speed, but I'm just playing safe here. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing then, copy this folder over to the 8 terabyte, and then click on resume. In fact, not resume, I need to reset. Okay, so let me just do this. So drag it over, drop, start. So of course, what we're doing now is measuring the read speed for this new 4 terabyte SSD. And as we can clearly see again, this particular bit rate is around 6.6 gigabytes per second. So it looks like the read and the write speeds are very close together here. Anyway, what I'm going to do is just to speed up through this, and then I will get a timing once the data has moved over. Okay, so I'm going to get ready here to hit pause and get this timing, which should be done in a second. There we go. Okay, that was 2 minutes and 30 seconds for the read speed. So what I'm going to do now is some manual bitrate calculations, and then that will give us the results for the real world disk speed test. Okay, so as far as the real world disk speed test results are concerned, for the write speed, the time taken was 2 minutes and 32 seconds, which is 152 seconds. So if we divide 1 million by 152, we get 6,578, which gives us a bit rate of 6,578 megabytes per second. And then as far as the read speed was concerned, the time taken was 2 minutes and 30 seconds, which is 150 seconds. So if we divide 1 million by 150, we get 6,666, which seems pretty ominous. Actually, what it is, the calculation actually was 6,666.6666667. So I think I might have to do something in the thumbnail or the title of the video to express that maybe this is the sign of the devil's SSD or something, I don't know. Anyway, that then gives us a final bit rate of 6,666 megabytes per second for the read speed. Anyway, I'm just going to get on to an end summary. Okay, so to an end summary then, and what I'm going to do here is to give you a bunch of answers to some questions that I gave to ACASIS regarding the new TB501 Pro. However, just a couple of quick things first before I get into that. Now, I have not done any temperature testing here whatsoever, and the reason why is because even though I was using a 1 terabyte folder to transfer, the drive just didn't get overly hot or anything. Of course it warmed up, but they all do, but it didn't get too hot. However, what I'm going to do is a dedicated video for this particular SSD where I am going to stress it out with a 4 terabyte data dump and then do all the temperature readings before and after the data dump. So for anybody who's interested in some very specific temperature testing, keep an eye out on the channel for that one. Now, as far as that speed was concerned of 6,666 megabytes per second, that was for the read speed. And don't forget, when I done the write speed test, the Mac did actually indicate that it had done the test quicker than what I actually timed it for. So there's a fair chance that the write speed was also 6,666 megabytes per second. Anyway, that particular number there is the fastest speed that I have managed to get so far on any enclosure setup with any SSD. So yeah, it's quite possibly the fastest you'll ever have seen on YouTube as well, to be honest. So I don't think anybody has ever reached that speed with a, like, you know, an enclosure that takes a single disk inside of it. Now, there is a massive elephant in the room here that I have to clear up as well. So I've used a very expensive Gen 5 SSD, which at best is probably only going to give us about 500 to 600, maybe 700 megabytes per second advantage over a lot of Gen 4 SSDs. Now, the problem with this is that it is massive diminishing returns when it comes to using a Gen 5 SSD right now, because they are super expensive. So I've got to be really honest here. I would not recommend that people run out and just go buy a Gen 5 SSD and throw it inside one of these new TB501 Pros when they come out. And the simple reason is it's just not going to be good value for money for like most people. However, if you want to be at the cutting edge or the bleeding edge, then of course, yeah, this is the exact setup that you want. So for someone like me who's a bit of a speed freak, of course, this is going to be what I would use. However, what we have to consider here is that what ACASIS have done with this new TB501 Pro is to basically look after their customer base and, you know, move forward with the expectations of what technology is going to be like tomorrow. Because don't forget, just the way like, you know, Gen 4 SSDs now are quite ubiquitous, that wasn't the same case when it was down to Gen 3. And of course, in like, you know, maybe not such a long time in the future, Gen 5 is going to be the standard for all SSDs. So basically, even if you buy one of the new versions of the TB501 Pro and you only use it with a Gen 4 NVMe SSD because the Gen 5s are ridiculously expensive, you are basically kind of future-proofing yourself there, because you can move to Gen 5 further down the line once they become cheaper. Anyway, let me just round off with these questions that I asked ACASIS and the answers that they gave me about this new TB501 Pro. So the first question was, how did ACASIS manage to modify the enclosure to accept Gen 5 SSDs? And the answer, we achieved Gen 5 SSD compatibility by upgrading the JHL9480 chip from the B1 version to the B2 version. This upgrade optimized the chip's compatibility with PCIe Gen 5 protocols. Did you work directly with Intel for the modification? Yes, we worked directly with Intel through multiple rounds of testing and debugging to ensure the modification's stability and performance. Is this a modification to the main chipset or something else? Yes, this is a main chipset modification, specifically the upgrade of the JHL9480 chip. Is this the world's first Gen 5 SSD compatible enclosure? We're amongst the first, but there's another niche Chinese brand that has produced small batches of Gen 5 compatible enclosures, though they haven't reached mass production yet. So while we're definitely in the first wave, we may not be the absolute first. Will this new Gen 5 compatible TB501 Pro be simply phased in to replace the current Gen 4 TB501 Pro? Yes, the Gen 5 compatible TB501 Pro will gradually replace the current Gen 4 version. We'll be directly replacing the PCBA boards in production to implement this upgrade. There's no mention of Gen 5 SSD compatibility on the box. Is this correct? That's correct. The current packaging doesn't mention Gen 5 compatibility. However, once we officially launch the Gen 5 compatible TB501 Pro, we'll update our website and marketing materials to highlight this feature, and future packaging will reflect this capability. When will this new Gen 5 SSD compatible TB501 Pro be available to buy on the ACASIS website? The product has entered mass production and we're targeting mid to late August 2025 for availability on our official website. I'll need to confirm the exact date and we'll keep you updated. Now, as far as that last question is concerned, as soon as ACASIS let me know when this new version of the TB501 Pro is available, which is obviously compatible with PCIe Gen 5 SSDs, I will do a very quick video on this channel just so that anybody who follows this channel will know when the actual, enclosure is available to buy on the ACASIS website. Now, it will only be available on the ACASIS website initially before it goes to Amazon, but I will definitely let people know when that is, so please keep an eye on the channel for that news. Now, as far as I'm concerned, that's this video done with. Now, if there's anything that I've forgotten to mention in the video, I will put it in the video description below, so you're best off checking that as well, just in case there is something that I might have missed out. Now, the very last thing I want to do here is to shout out a massive thank you to ACASIS, and the reason why is because this is now the second time where ACASIS have given me the opportunity to do the very first review of one of their products, and also in both instances it was variations of the TB501. The first one was their first kind of 80 gigabits per second Thunderbolt drive, and this one is now going to be another landmark because it's going to be the first Gen 5 compatible. Now, the fact that ACASIS have come to a small YouTube channel to give that small YouTube channel the opportunity to review their products first, I think is absolutely and totally 100% a massive big deal, because us small YouTubers, we never get those opportunities. It's always the really big YouTubers that get everything first and stuff. So I've just got to, again, just point this out just to say how exceptionally good this is of ACASIS to support small YouTube channels like mine. And ACASIS also support a lot of other small YouTube channels as well within the tech space. And I just think it's worth, making that be known to people out there, because it doesn't always normally work this way. And believe me, I've been around long enough to know, as a small YouTuber, that no one really cares about small YouTube channels. Anyway, I've got a bunch of other videos coming up to do with this enclosure, some 8TB variations, a couple of RAID variations of other enclosures, tons of stuff coming up with ACASIS things in them, so keep an eye out on the channel for that stuff. And also there will be links in the video description to all the stuff used in the video. I've also got a 15% discount code for the ACASIS website, which is site-wide, which means that you can use that code on absolutely anything that you buy on the ACASIS website. Now, if you found this video useful, insightful, entertaining, or if you've just liked it in any way, please do give it a thumbs up, and a sub to the channel would be absolutely awesome. I'm David Harry. Thank you very much for watching this video. Take care and goodbye now.